I was sitting in a theater full of pretty excited moviegoers during the early Amazon screening of Aquaman, Warner Bros. New installment in the DC Extended Universe. And I was thinking to myself, uh-oh, here we go. The movie was lumbering up to around the end of the first act, and I was like, oh man, DC is going to be a day late and $1 short yet once again. Well, maybe not $1 short, literally, because this movie's going to make a mint. And it's not like that I've particularly disliked any of the previous 5 movies that make up the DCEU, at least not to the extent that some moviegoers and a lot of critics have. They haven't necessarily been bad movies. They just haven't been particularly good movies either, with one key exception. And Aquaman, well, Aquaman wasn't changing the tide of my thinking at this point in the story. So, here's the setup. An unmarried lighthouse keeper in Maine, Thomas Curry, sees a woman washed up on the rocks of the shoreline during a very intense storm. Braving the elements, he goes down, rescues her. Now, it turns out that she's not just a woman. She's an Aqua Woman, a princess of the secret underwater nation of Atlantis, named, somewhat unimaginatively, Atlanta. So, like a lot of fish out of water stories, they end up falling in love, get married, and have a baby boy. This boy's name is Arthur, who it turns out is a water breather just like his mother, along with being able to survive on land. And he also shares the same kind of superpowers that she possesses, and maybe more. But the Atlanteans, they want their princess back, and they force her to return home. Arthur grows up rather surly and resents his mother for leaving, not really fully knowing the story of what happened, even though Atlanta has arranged for someone to help him learn how to use his aqua powers during his teen years. Eventually, Arthur learns that he has a half-brother under the sea, the power-hungry Orm. And Orm is trying to marshal a coalition of undersea kingdoms so he can wage a war with all of us landlubbers. Arthur wants none of that, really. He just wants to be left alone to drink and shoot the shit with his old man and perform the odd occasional heroic deed. But pretty soon, the time comes when he's got to make a decision. Is he going to stay out of the impending war and let the fish chips fall where they may? Or is he going to try to live up to his name and become a king in order to stop it? Now, like I said earlier, during some of this setup, the execution was just kind of awkward. The script was the main culprit, with overbaked dialogue that seemed to exist mainly to just provide backstory. And it was peppered with the type of one-liners that might seem great on paper, but when heard out loud, they're just kind of lame. If it hadn't been for Jason Momoa's easy charm and alpha male appeal, the beginning could have been even worse. Now, the pacing of the opening act also left a lot to be desired. It was like it was, almost unsure as to how much or how little to include in Aquaman's origin story. But suddenly, and I can pretty much remember the scene where it happened, the movie started to feel like it was becoming more assured and more comfortable with itself. And it began to leave behind the darkness and the weight that's burdened a lot of the DC movies that's come before it. It's almost like the filmmakers were shown a copy of the Wonder Woman movie in mid-production, and that they learned something that group obviously had learned. They learned how to be fun and entertaining even when dealing with dark, violent chaos. And that's something that people in Marvel seem to have grasped a long time ago. But maybe DC's finally getting it now. And the last 2 acts, for me, moved along quite nicely, with well-paced action and moments to let yourself breathe, until reaching a pretty exciting mammoth conclusion. And one scene, set on the island of Sicily, stood out for me in particular as a very well done, nicely choreographed action scene. I think it's probably the best scene in the movie. I also really enjoyed the special effects in this movie. Aquaman's CGI work is, at least in my eyes, much better than the previous movie, Justice League. It helps that here we get a mostly flesh and blood villain with Patrick Wilson's Orm versus, whatever the hell that fake computer thing was in Justice League. The visual effects supervisors are Kevin McElwain from the Fast and Furious franchise and Charles Gibson, who's won a couple of Oscars in the past for his work on Babe and Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Man's Chest. I was actually kind of surprised that Aquaman didn't make the short list of movies being considered for best visual effects this year. But then again, maybe I shouldn't be surprised because this aspect of the movie doesn't seem to draw a consensus, like a lot of things in the movie. Now, I've heard opinions fall on both sides of the fence, with one friend of mine telling me that he was really ticked off that one particular CGI heavy scene in this movie, in Aquaman, had been favorably compared to a similar one in one of the Lord of the Rings installments. And I believe that his quote to me was, 20-year-old CGI for the win. As far as the acting is concerned, Momoa doesn't try to reinvent the wheel. He lets his easygoing charm do the work, mixed in with a little self-deprecation and bad boy moodiness for good measure. As we were walking back to the car, my wife told me that she was going to give Aquaman 3.5 stars and Momoa 4 stars. But enough of that guy. How about Amber Heard? Let's talk about her. Amber Heard brings a lot of energy to her role as Mira, another princess of the sea. She's betrothed to Orm, and she's being groomed to be a queen. But she's also secretly plotting against him, and she tries to enlist Arthur's aid to stop him. Heard and Momoa have good chemistry together, and she's one of the bright spots fairly early on in the movie. As for the more veteran members of the cast, Nicole Kidman, as Atlanta, gets to play a bit of a badass here, and it's kind of refreshing. I think she sometimes comes across as a bit too cold, too removed in a lot of her films, but I think you can plainly see that she's having some fun here. Maybe her fellow Aussie, Cate Blanchett, told her how much fun she had slumming in a superhero movie. Willem Dafoe plays Arthur's mentor, Vulko. Dafoe's one of those actors who seem to get better with time, and I am saying that knowing full well how good an actor he was to begin with. The last few years have seen him give some of his finer performances, and he may end up getting an Oscar nomination pretty shortly for playing Vincent van Gogh in Julian Schnabel's At Eternity's Gate. Here, he's not required to show a lot of range, but he's an old vet who adds a lot of value. And speaking of an old vet who adds value, there's Dolph Lundgren. Now, nobody's going to confuse Lundgren with having the thespian skills and range that Dafoe has, but old Dolph is having himself a pretty good year on screen. Playing Mira's father, King Nerys, he gives another solid turn and another major release, the other one being Creed 2 from last month. Sometimes an actor just seems to grow more comfortable and more confident with age, and he seems to be enjoying getting a couple of pretty meaty supporting roles. For the main villain, Juan brought Patrick Wilson over with him from the Conjuring movies, and it's a pretty good choice. Wilson is one of those actors I admire, in that he can play good guys or bad guys, and he can be equally effective doing either one. There's another villain familiar to fans of Aquaman that gets some playing time here, and that's Manta, played by the believably pissed-off looking Yahya Abdul-Mateen. He's not as front and center as Orm in the movie, but he plays a big part in the plot, and could see more playing time on down the road. The director of the movie, James Wan, who, like previous DC movies, is no stranger to darker material with his work on the first Saw and the Conjuring franchise. He also directed Furious 7, which no doubt primed him for the bigger budget goings-on here. He does a pretty good job at holding the elements together, at least after that first act. Critical responses to DCEU movies have been mixed, at best, and those movies have divided the franchise's own fan base as well. What they've done, despite some people carping that they've underperformed, is make Warner Bros. Some profit. Justice League notwithstanding, those movies have made $4 billion against a $1.5 billion investment. Early reactions show that Aquaman is not going to be much different. Critical reviews have been very mixed, and the opinions of everyday moviegoers that I've talked to have been pretty much the same. But I can't help but feel that this movie, much like young Arthur in an early scene, is being a little unfairly picked on. Sometimes movies become victims of preconceived notions And if moviegoers feel like they've been burnt once before, or more, those prejudices can be pretty hard to overcome. And I can see why some moviegoers would have those preconceived notions. The DC movies are quite understandably compared to their comic counterparts at Marvel. And with Marvel movies, there seems to have been a plan, a very well thought out plan, one with an easy to follow continuity. The DC universe has seemed a bit nebulous. Their gods have been of the minor variety, not the all-knowing kind like Kevin Feige. DC movies have also had a hard time standing up on their own two figurative feet. They've been weighted down with all the portent and doom that they've inherited from their spiritual forefathers, the three Dark Knight movies directed by Christopher Nolan. And while the Marvel Universe heroes have been guardians of the galaxy, if you will, able to stride across their universe with confidence and with clarity and with a sense of purpose, the DC heroes have sometimes been swallowed up by the black holes of their very oppressive themes. And I kind of wonder if Aquaman is getting a bit of unwarranted grief because of other factors, such as the perception of Aquaman as a somewhat ineffectual superhero, at least compared to his super friends and Justice League counterparts. Even among the comic book community itself, this is kind of mirrored by the public reaction to the DCEU in comparison to Marvel's universe. So, here's the thing. My advice is to go find this movie and just dive right in. But just don't get caught up in any of the negative currents that might be swirling around it. Now, I'm not quite as excited as my wife was about Aquaman, but I'm going to go ahead and give it 3 knobs. And, as always, thank you so much for watching. If you've got a thought about this particular video, or maybe you've got a movie that you'd like to see reviewed, please use the comments section below. I would love to hear from you. If you enjoyed what you saw, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Also, you can hit Film Nobs up on social media at Twitter and Facebook. And finally, be sure to check out our podcast, which can be found on iTunes and SoundCloud. And once again, thank you and take care.